The silence in Mr. Abernathy's shop, Ethelred's archives, was not merely an absence of sound, it was a presence, a custodian. It settled over the labyrinth of bookshelves like a layer of felt, absorbing the whisper of turning pages and the soft sigh of settling leather. It was a silence that had weight and texture, smelling of decaying paper, polished mahogany, and the faint, sweet ghost of pipe tobacco from decades past. Elara Vance moved through this silence as if it were a sacred grove. Her footsteps, cushioned by a faded Isfahan rug worn thin by a century of bibliophiles, made no sound. She was a young woman with a constellation of freckles across her nose, and eyes the color of old sherry, eyes that were perpetually looking at something just beyond the shoulder of the present moment. Her fingers, often stained with the blue-black ink she used for her own futile attempts at writing, trailed along the gilded spines of encyclopedias as she passed. To anyone else, it might have felt like a mausoleum. To Elara, it was a symphony hall where the music was perpetually poised, waiting for a reader to become its conductor. Her official title was Assistant Archival Manager. In reality, she was a glorified shelf duster, inventory taker, and, on the rare occasions the bell above the door chimed, a deterrent to casual browsers. Mr. Abernathy, a man so desiccated and ancient he seemed to be made of the same vellum as his prized collection, believed books were for preserving, not for reading. "Reading wears the words out, my girl," he would rasp, his voice like pages being torn slowly. "The light of the eyes is as damaging as the light of the sun." Today's task was a testament to his philosophy. In the back room, a place known only as the catacombs, stood a teetering stack of cardboard boxes. They had arrived a week ago, exhumed from the estate of one Professor Alastair Finch, a historian of obscure maritime lore. The boxes smelled, not unpleasantly, of a closed-up attic, of cedar chips and a faint, melancholic hint of pipe smoke that was different from Mr. Abernathy's. "Your mission, Miss Vance," Abernathy had said, placing a bony hand on the top box, "is to log each volume. Title, author, date of publication, condition. Note any insect damage, water stains, or brittle spines. Do not read them. Catalog them. They are artifacts, not amusements." And so, she began. The first few boxes were exactly as expected. Dry, academic treatises. A taxonomic study of North Atlantic barnacles, 1892. Trade winds and mercantile policy in the Age of Sail. The dialects of old fishermen. She logged them meticulously, her pen scratching in the ledger, the only sound competing with the slow, patient tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. The dust she disturbed rose in protest, golden in the slatted light from the single high window. It was in the third box that the texture of the contents changed. The stiff, board-bound academic texts gave way to softer, more personal volumes. Journals, dozens of them, all uniformly bound in a serviceable, dark brown leather, their spines cracked along the same lines, like the palms of an old sailor's hands. Her heart gave a little skip. Personal journals were a breach in the fortress wall of dry facts. They were a whisper of a life lived. She opened the first one. October 14th, 1887. Rain again. Mrs. Higgins' cat has produced another litter. bought 2 pounds of potatoes. The second, ledger for household expenses. Coal, 5 shillings. Mutton, 3 minutes. The third, a treatise on the proper salting of cod. Her initial spark of excitement guttered. These were not the confessions of a soul, but the mundane ledger of a mind obsessed with minutiae. Professor Finch, it seemed, was a profoundly boring man. With a sigh, she reached into the bottom of the box, her fingers brushing against something different. It wasn't the smooth, worn leather of the other journals. It was rougher, pebbled, like stone or skin. She pulled it out. It was a smaller volume, tucked away as if in hiding. The cover was a strange, grayish, textured hide she couldn't identify. Whaleskin? Perhaps a shark? It was bound with a crude, hand-stitched sinew, and it was closed with a clasp, not brass or iron, but a tarnished silver thing wrought in the shape of a bird, its wings spread as if in mid-flight. A single, tiny chip of obsidian for its eye. The silence in the catacombs seemed to deepen, to lean in. The tick of the clock faded away. Alara's breath caught in her throat. This was no household ledger. Mr. Abernathy's warning echoed in her mind, but it was a feeble thing, a whisper against a gale. This book was a siren's call. She looked around. The shop was silent. Abernathy was likely napping in his upstairs flat. With trembling fingers, she plucked a hairpin from the bun at the nape of her neck. It was a simple, wire thing. She straightened it, her hands surprisingly steady, and inserted the tip into the tiny keyhole of the silver bird. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a click that was as sharp and final as a pistol shot in the sacred silence, the clasp gave way. She opened the cover. The pages were not paper, but a thick, pulpy parchment, yellowed with age and rough at the edges. And the writing. It was not the uniform, black ink of a scholar. It was a frantic, scrawling hand, written in a rusty, brownish fluid that had seeped into the parchment, making each word look like a scar. She didn't need to smell it. Some deep, primal part of her brain recognized the iron oxide tang of old blood. A chill, cold and sharp as an iceberg's shard, traced its way down her spine. Yet, it was coupled with a thrill of such intense, overwhelming curiosity that she could not have closed the book if the shop were on fire. The first line was written larger than the rest, a desperate anchor at the top of the page. Do not trust the map you see. Trust the one you feel. The heart knows the currents the eyes cannot. Beneath it, the narrative began, the script growing tighter, more hurried. I, Alaric of the Veldt, once a mapmaker for the Royal Society, now navigator of the damned ship Serpent's Coin, set this down in the hope that it may outlive us. If you are reading this, then the world still turns in the old way, and our voyage into the impossible has not been entirely erased. Alara was no longer in the dusty back room of a bookshop. The scent of cedar and attic dust vanished, replaced by the phantom smells of salt spray, tar, and the peculiar, coppery odor of a coming storm. The rustle of a mouse in the wainscoting became the groan of a ship's timbers against a restless sea. They think navigation is about stars and charts, Alaric wrote. It is, for the small seas, for the waters between London and the Carolinas. But the world is vaster than they know. There are other oceans, layered over our own, visible only at the fraying edges of reality. We sail the liquid roads, currents of possibility and memory that flow between worlds. Our captain, a man with eyes the color of a drowned sky, seeks not spice nor silk, but chronos sand, time itself, solidified in the doldrums of forgotten history, shimmering like powdered diamond in an hourglass. Page after page, Elara fell into the world. She read of days that lasted for weeks under a sun that pulsed like a great golden heart. She read of nights where the stars were not distant suns, but brilliant, watching eyes. She read of the sirens, not beautiful women as the myth said, but creatures of pure, liquid sound who offered not temptation, but truth. A truth about your own soul so stark and pure that men would leap into the abyss not to die, but to get closer to its source. And she read of the terror. The ship was lost, driven from the known liquid roads by a pursuing shadow Alaric only called the stillness, a entity of nothingness that consumed sound, memory, and hope. Crewmen would wake up not knowing their own names. The ship's cat, a one-eyed tabby named Barnacles, simply forgot how to meow. The stillness feeds on memory, Alaric scrawled, the letters shaking. It is unmaking us, piece by piece. Our only hope is the weeping atlas, not a chart of seas, but of the soul's own geography. It is said to be the first map, drawn by the tears of a star that fell to earth, grieving for its place in the sky. It does not show you where you are, but where you need to be. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the terrifying wonder of the tale. She turned the page, her fingers leaving damp prints on the rough parchment. The next entry described their desperate search for the fallen star. We found it, not in a crater, but in a bay of black glass, on an island that does not exist on any map. The star is not a rock, but a living heart of crystal, large as a merchantman, beating with a soft blue light that hums in your very bones. And the atlas is inside. The captain says we must cut it out, but I have seen it in a dream. The map is not a thing to be owned, but to be experienced. It is a symphony of cold and heat, a tapestry of longing and regret that will guide a worthy soul not to a place, but to a state of being. Home. She was at the final written page. The script was a barely legible scrawl, as if written in a violent storm or in the grip of a terrible fear. The captain has taken an axe to the crystal heart. The light is fading. The humming is becoming a scream. The stillness is upon us. I have failed as a navigator. I have led us to ruin. But the atlas, it cannot be destroyed. It has chosen a new keeper. It has fractured into 1,000 shards of knowing and hidden itself in the one place the stillness cannot follow. The stories. It is in the tales, the myths, the journals, the dreams. It is waiting to be felt again. The last sentence was a raw, desperate plea, the penmanship disintegrating into a jagged line. I have placed my shard, my piece of the way, where it can be found again, not by a sailor, but by a reader, a true reader, whose heart can feel the tides in the ink. It is in the... The sentence ended, not with a period, but in a great sweeping tear that ripped through the parchment, obliterating the final words. It looked as if the journal had been ripped from Alaric's hands by an unimaginable force. Alaric gasped, jerking back as if the tear had been a physical wound. The real world crashed back in. The dust, the towering silent boxes, the grandfather clock ticking with mundane insistence. But nothing was the same. The silence was no longer sacred. It was pregnant with unspoken stories. The books on the shelves were no longer artifacts. They were sleeping vessels, each one a potential serpent's coin waiting for a navigator. She looked down at the strange, seaskin journal in her hands. It was no longer just a curious find. It was a log of a doomed voyage, a key to a lost treasure, a shard of a celestial map. And the final torn sentence was a hook in her very soul. It is in the... In the what? The library? The shop? This very box? A slow, certain smile touched her lips, erasing the last of her fear. Mr. Abernathy and his ledger of the dead could wait. The dry academic cataloging was a blasphemy against the living story she now held. She had a map to feel. Her voyage had just begun. The world had not changed, but Alara's perception of it had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams were no longer just particles. They were the stirred-up remnants of ancient stories. The scent of old paper was the breath of sleeping worlds. The weight of the strange journal in her hands was a gravitational pull, tethering her to a reality far wider and wilder than the one she had woken up in. Mr. Abernathy's warning, "Do not read them. Catalog them," echoed in her mind, but it was a faint, ridiculous thing, like a parent telling a storm not to blow. She had tasted the chronos sand on the wind of Alaric's words. She had felt the terror of the stillness. There was no going back to being a mere cataloger. Her first task was the torn page. She held it up to the weak light from the high window, turning it this way and that. The tear was brutal and final, a jagged coastline on the parchment island of the journal's last page. No hidden words revealed themselves in the translucency of the skin. She ran her fingertips over the ragged edge, feeling a faint, almost electric tingle, a phantom pain from the moment of violence that had severed Alaric's message. It is in the... In the what? The frustration was a physical ache. It could be anything. In the locket? In the larder? In the lion's mouth? The possibilities were endless, maddening. Think, Alara, think. She was a reader. This was a text. Not just the words, but the object itself. Alaric was a navigator, a map maker. He thought in patterns, in clues. He wouldn't have hidden his shard of the atlas somewhere random. He would have placed it where a kindred spirit, a true reader, would think to look. Her eyes fell on the journal's binding, the seaskin cover, the sinew stitching, the silver bird clasp. The bird. Its wings were spread, its obsidian eye seeming to hold a fragment of the room's dim light. A navigator would look to the skies, to the stars. A bird in flight could be a symbol of freedom, of direction, of A carrier? With a delicacy born of reverence, she pried at the edges of the silver clasp. It was firmly attached to the cover. She examined the bird itself. Its shape was elegant, but unremarkable, until she pressed her thumbnail against the tiny obsidian eye. To her astonishment, it gave a minuscule click and depressed slightly. Her breath hitched. She pushed harder. There was a soft, almost inaudible snick. The silver bird, which she had assumed was a single, solid casting, split along a hairline seam she hadn't noticed. The back of the bird, the part that had been flush against the cover, hinged open like a locket. Inside was not a picture, but a small, tightly rolled cylinder of a different kind of parchment, thin as an onion skin and incredibly fragile. Her hands trembled as she carefully extracted it. Using the brass letter opener from Mr. Abernathy's desk, she gently weighted its corners and unrolled it. It was not a map in the conventional sense. There was no land, no sea, no compass rose. Instead, it was a complex, beautiful, and utterly bewildering diagram of interconnected lines and nodes, drawn in the same rusty blood ink. It looked like a neural network or a celestial chart of unknown constellations. Words were scribbled in a tiny, precise hand at various points. Sorrow's Reef, the Memory Lagoon, the Spire of Lost Questions, and in the center, where a heart would be in a living thing, was a single, stark phrase. The Atlas is in the telling. The telling, not a place, an action, a story. Ilara leaned back, her mind reeling. Alaric hadn't hidden a physical shard of a crystal heart. He had hidden his knowledge, his piece of the navigational data, within a story. The journal itself was the container, but the true map was the narrative. To find the Weeping Atlas, one didn't need to dig for treasure. One needed to understand the tale. This changed everything. It meant the shard could be anywhere. It could be in a published book, a forgotten poem, a folktale whispered in a tavern. It could be right here, in Ethelred's archives, hiding in plain sight on one of these thousands of shelves, waiting for the right reader to feel its resonance. A new, daunting purpose solidified within her. She was no longer just a reader of Alaric's story. She was an active participant. She had to find the other shards. She had to become a cartographer of stories. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. She logged the remaining journals from the Finch collection with robotic efficiency, her mind a whirlwind of liquid roads and crystalline hearts. She hid Alaric's journal and the cryptic diagram inside her own worn satchel, the weight of it a comforting, terrifying secret. When the grandfather clock chimed 5, Mr. Abernathy emerged from his upstairs flat, blinking like a mole in the light. "Finished with the Finch boxes, Miss Vance?" "Nearly, sir," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Just some final condition notes to add." He nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, they lingered on her satchel. "Very well. Lock up. And remember," he said, his gaze piercing hers, "some books are like deep water. It is unwise to swim in them if you cannot see the bottom." Was it a general warning, or did he know? She forced a neutral smile. "Of course, Mr. Abernathy. Good night." The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the shop seemed to exhale. the silence becoming less oppressive, more collaborative. Alara didn't leave. She had work to do. She started in the section she knew best, travel and exploration. She ran her fingers along the spines, not reading titles, but feeling. She sought that same electric tingle she'd felt from Alaric's journal, that pull on her imagination. She pulled down accounts of Arctic voyages, of journeys through the Sahara, of balloon flights across continents. They were thrilling, yes, but they were of this world. They lacked the metaphysical strangeness, the scent of other oceans. For hours she worked, pulling down books, reading a few pages, sensing their texture. She found nothing. Disappointment began to creep in, cold and insidious. Perhaps she was fooling herself. Perhaps it was all the fancy of an over-imaginative girl in a dusty shop. Exhausted, she slumped into Abernathy's worn armchair. Her gaze fell upon a section she always avoided, poetry. She had never had the patience for it, for its oblique meanings and emotional weather. But now, the words from the diagram echoed in her mind. The atlas is in the telling. Poetry was pure telling. It was emotion and image distilled into language. Was it so different from Alaric's description of the atlas as a symphony of cold and heat? With a sigh, she walked to the poetry section. It was a small, neglected alcove. She closed her eyes and let her hand drift over the books. One felt different, cooler. She pulled it out. It was a slim volume, its green cloth cover faded to the color of moss. The title was stamped in flaking gold, Songs of the Salt and Starlight, by Orrin Seacall. The name was probably a pseudonym, but it sent a jolt through her. Seacall. She opened it at random. The poem was titled, The Drowned Bell. I ring a note that cannot be heard, in a spire that cannot be seen. My tongue is tied, my voice a bird, lost in the deep and green. I call to shores of memory, where forgotten anchors rust. A chime for what used to be, turned to patient dust. Alara froze. It wasn't the same as Alaric's journal, but it was adjacent. It spoke the same language of loss, of unseen things, of memories submerged. It felt like it existed on the same spectral coastline. She devoured the book, poem after poem. They were full of maritime metaphors, but twisted, strange. Lighthouses that shone inward to illuminate the soul. Nets that caught dreams instead of fish. Sailors who navigated by the sound of their own heartbeats. And then she found it. Tucked between the pages of a poem called Elegy for a Lost Compass was another piece of parchment. Same onion skin thinness, same blood ink. It was another section of the diagram, this one showing a complex knot of lines labeled The Labyrinth of Echoes. And at its center, another phrase. To hear the map, you must first become silent. She had found it, the first shard. Not the physical atlas, but a piece of its celestial blueprint, hidden not in a journal of fact, but in a volume of poetry. Alaric's clue was real. The map was truly in the telling. Holding the two pieces of the diagram side by side, She saw they fit along a torn edge. The lines from one flowed into the other, creating a more complex pattern. It was a staggering, beautiful puzzle. The clock chimed 11. She had been there for hours. She carefully placed the poetry book back on the shelf, committing its location to memory. She now had a new, even more pressing reason to come to work tomorrow. As she locked the shop door and stepped out into the foggy London night, the mundane sounds of carriage wheels and distant voices felt like a veil over a truer, wilder world. She carried a secret in her satchel, a chart of impossible geographies, a quest born from blood and story. The weeping atlas was calling, and Alara, the girl with ink-stained fingers, had finally learned how to listen. The following days in Aethelred's archives took on the quality of a secret crusade. Alara moved through her duties with a surface-level diligence that would have satisfied even Mr. Abernathy, but beneath it, her mind was a humming lodestone, constantly sensing, searching, feeling. The two joined fragments of the diagram were hidden in a hollowed-out copy of A Treatise on the Proper Salting of Cod, a irony that did not escape her, and she studied them in stolen moments, the intricate lines burning themselves into her memory. The search was no longer random. The poem, Songs of the Salt and Starlight, had given her a new filter. She was no longer looking for tales of adventure, but for whispers of the metaphysical. She sought out the esoteric section, the folklore, the accounts of so-called mad prophets and visionaries. The shop, once a static collection, became a dynamic landscape. Every shelf a potential mountain range, hiding a path to another world. It was during this methodical search that she first felt it, a new sensation, entirely different from the electric pull of the journal or the melancholic resonance of the poetry. It was in the philosophy aisle, a section thick with the dust of unanswerable questions. She was reaching for a volume of Hegel when a wave of profound cold washed over her. It was not a temperature change, but a chill of the spirit. The ambient sounds of the shop, the tick of the clock, the settling of the floorboards, seemed to deaden, swallowed by a sudden, localized silence. The air grew heavy, difficult to breathe. In the center of this sensory void was a book. It was a plain, gray-bound volume, its title nearly worn away. Discourses on Ontological Stillness. The word stillness snagged her attention like a fishhook. Her heart, which had been a steady drum, became a frantic bird against her ribs. This was it. This was the feeling Alaric had described. Not the vibrant, terrifying wonder of the liquid roads, but the consuming nothingness of the stillness. The entity that had pursued him was not just a creature of his story. It was a presence that had left a stain, a psychic scar on the narrative world. And some echo of it was here, clinging to this book. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave the gray book untouched on its shelf. But she was a navigator now. You cannot map a danger by avoiding it. She pulled the book down. It was unnaturally cold. She opened it. The text was dry, academic, a philosophical discussion about states of non-being. But in the margins, a different hand had written notes, a frantic, familiar scrawl. Alaric's hand.
It reads us.
Said one marginal note beside a paragraph on existential voids. It learns our shape by what we are not. Another, next to a chapter on silence. Not an absence of sound, but a consumption of it. A hunger. And a final, terrifying note, scrawled in a panic at the end of the book. It knows I've hidden a piece. It hunts the maps. It is in the stories, too. The stillness wasn't just a monster from a lost voyage. It was a predator that crossed the boundary between story and reality, hunting the fragments of the weeping atlas. And it knew a piece was here, in this shop. The heavy feeling lifted as suddenly as it had descended. The clock's ticking returned, loud and abrupt. Elara slammed the book shut, her breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air. She had to find the next fragment, and quickly. This was no longer just a quest, it was a race. Driven by a new, sharp fear, her search became more frantic. She spent her lunch hours, her evenings, scouring the shelves. She ignored the travel section, the poetry, the philosophy. She started looking at the books no one ever touched, the ones behind others, the ones on the highest shelves, coated in the thickest dust. 3 days after her encounter with the gray book, she found herself balanced on the top rung of a rolling ladder, her fingers brushing against the spines of books tucked into the space where the shelf met the ceiling. Her hand closed on a book that felt wet. She jerked her hand back, but her fingers were dry. It was an illusion, a sensory ghost. She pulled the book out. It was a slim, water-stained volume bound in a dark, rubbery leather that felt disturbingly like the skin of a deep-sea creature. There was no title. When she opened it, the pages were blank. Every single one. Blank, but not empty. They held the faint, salty smell of the open ocean. And when she riffled the pages, they made a sound like a gentle wave washing over shingle. A blank book. Her first thought was despair, a dead end. But then, Alaric's words came back to her. The heart knows the currents the eyes cannot. And the clue from the poetry shard. To hear the map, you must first become silent. She wasn't supposed to see this one. She was supposed to feel it. Clutching the blank book, she climbed down the ladder and retreated to the deepest, most secluded corner of the catacombs, behind the tower of finch boxes. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, and placed the book in her lap. She closed her eyes, forced her breathing to slow, and placed her palms flat on the open, blank pages. At first, there was nothing, just the cool, slightly damp texture of the parchment. Then, a faint vibration, like a tuning fork struck in a distant room. She pushed her consciousness towards it, silencing the chatter of her own mind, making herself a vessel. Images began to form behind her eyelids, not seen, but perceived. The feel of a cold, crystalline deck under bare feet. The taste of ozone and alien nectar. The sound of a sail snapping taut in a wind that smelled of cinnamon. A constellation of 3 blue stars in a perfect triangle, burning with a cold, guiding light. It was a memory. Not hers, but the book's. A memory of a moment on the liquid roads. And with the memory came knowledge, a navigational data point, a set of celestial coordinates, a specific alignment of feelings and sensations that represented a safe passage through a place Alaric had called the mists of forgetting. When she opened her eyes, the blank page was no longer blank. A third fragment of the diagram had shimmered into existence, drawn in faint, silvery lines that looked like condensed mist. It connected perfectly to the other two. The map was growing, and at its center now was a new phrase. The stillness fears the remembered song. She had done it. She had retrieved the shard not by reading, but by listening with her soul. A fierce, triumphant joy surged through her. But it was short-lived. A shadow fell over her. An unusual choice for afternoon reading, Miss Vance. Mr. Abernathy stood over her, his gaunt frame blocking the light. His eyes, usually hazy with age, were sharp and focused, darting from her face to the blank book in her lap, to the silvery diagram already beginning to fade from the page. His gaze lingered on the water-stained cover, and a complex emotion, recognition, hunger, fear, flashed across his wizened features. He knew. I was just cataloging its condition, Alara stammered, quickly closing the book and getting to her feet. Were you? He said flatly. It wasn't a question. He reached out a bony hand. A curious volume. I will take it. There was no refusing. She handed it over, her heart sinking. He held the book as if it were a holy relic or a venomous snake. Some books, Miss Vance, are not meant to be found. And some quests are not meant for the young. He looked directly at her, and his voice dropped to a whisper. He warned me you might come, the man with the drowned sky eyes. Alara felt the floor drop away beneath her. The captain of the Serpent's Coin. Abernathy wasn't just a curmudgeonly shopkeeper. He was a guardian, or a jailer. The stillness is not just in the stories, girl, he said, his voice grave. It is a rot that follows the Atlas. It has been quiet for a long time. Your activities are stirring it from its slumber. He turned and walked away, taking the blank book with him, leaving Alara alone in the gloom of the catacombs. She was not alone in her quest. She had a rival, and she had a keeper. And the enemy she had thought was confined to a blood-inked journal was now awake and hunting in her world. The game had changed entirely.